Hello, peer listeners. Greetings to all. Hope everyone is doing fine. I'm Bashir, your host for the podcast Peer Talk Hiring an Infosec Professional in 2020. And let me welcome our guest, Christopher J. Hodson. Hi, Chris.
Hey
Welcome.
Bashir, how are we doing today?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome to Peer Talk and thank you for giving us your valuable time. Chris is a CISO for Tanium. He has also authored a book which reached number one bestseller on Amazon UK. First of all, let me introduce myself. Well, I'm Bashir and I'm in cybersecurity for the past 2.5 decades. I started my career programming in C and assembly, used to write disk utilities like recovering files, data, etc. Slowly, I moved towards helping build IT infrastructure as a solutions architect. For the past 2 years, I've been working independently as a consultant. And apart from this, I've been a moderator at Peerless for the past 1 year. Well, that's about me. Now let us hear about Chris. Chris, can you tell something more about yourself?
Of course, I've got and thanks for the nice intro there. Yes, I'm Chris Hodson. So I've been in this industry for coming on 20 years now. The majority of that time spent in what I would call end user organizations. So working in financial services, legal, retail, technology. And I started my career, I didn't start in C and assembly. I wish I had, it would have been easier for malware analysis. But starting more in kind of Visual Basic programming, Windows scripting, anything that I could really add to, I suppose,
Yeah,
GPO and AD configuration, anything around getting the job done on kind of the IT support and engineering side. Initially, spent a lot of time self-studying, and I think that's relevant for the conversation that we're going to have today. So I went
yeah,
through that kind of traditional tech track of kind of CompTIA Network Plus, A Plus, Microsoft MCS A's and MCSEs. Which did I do? I did
yeah,
2000 and 2003. And it kind of
right.
developed my design and architecture skills from there. So I spent a lot of time working, and again, predominantly in financial services as a solutions and an enterprise architect, and latterly running security functions.
Right.
Waitrose would be a good example of that. So running things over there, and then moving into the vendor world. So I spent 2.5 years with Zscaler. So that was an exciting time seeing that company grow and
Yeah.
seeing, I think, cultural acceptance of cloud computing and public cloud especially. And now, as you rightly say, I find myself at Tanium. I'm having a blast running the security function there. And I'm sure most people on the call have heard of Tanium, know what we do, but endpoint management, so endpoint from an operations, risk, and cybersecurity perspective. So I'm lucky enough to speak with CISOs and run sessions like this as my day job, which is cool, as well, obviously, as looking at kind of development of kind of our solution as well, and understanding and hopefully fixing customer problems. And as you rightly said, yeah, I wrote a book as well. I'd love to say I was number one on all of
Yeah.
Amazon UK. I think maybe J.K. Rowling would have something to say about that. But certainly certainly in the I think it was the computer and network security category. But no, it was something I was incredibly proud of. And yeah, I get asked questions on a daily basis about some of the bits and bobs in the book. So yeah, happy to jam on anything in there as well.
Yeah. Uh, that's quite an impressive introduction, Chris. Okay, let me start with the questions. Uh, Chris, as you know, everyone is aware that there is a huge talent gap when it comes to hiring cyber security professionals. How best can the gap be reduced?
Yes, I think I get asked this question quite a lot. I think we have to look at where the gap exists. And I can only speak from personal experience, and I'm sure we'll have people who will respond to the pod and maybe disagree with me. But I'm not sure when I'm hiring that I see much of a gap. I think the gap is potentially maybe entry level roles. Certainly, I think entry level roles are potentially more difficult to obtain. Something I didn't mention in my introduction was I work as a mentor for Cybery, and I speak with people who are new to our industry on a fairly regular basis, and they may be technically proficient, but I think sometimes people struggle with construction of a CV. People don't necessarily know what hiring managers are looking for. I think
Yeah.
sometimes the who is defining job roles has somewhat of an impact on this as well. In my own experience, I've seen out there some rather aspirational job specs, shall we say, where, for example, a developer must know every language going or have intimate knowledge of front and back end development, full stack, when really they're only looking for someone who's maybe front end. Um, I don't see a huge amount of gap in resumes or CVs when I'm looking for roles. I'm seeing some first class candidates. I think sometimes, and this is just feedback I've had from kind of the community that I'm part of, potentially at times organizations don't necessarily want to pay what is necessary for the
Right.
skills they require. And I think that is sometimes perceived to be a gap. I would love to hear what people in the peerless community think about this, because I hear very different stories from different people. But there is obviously a lot of work out there, but getting the right people to the right role, I think we as hiring managers and as HR and personnel departments have our part to play in making sure we're getting the right people for the right roles at the right price, I would like to say as well.
Right. And what kind of security skill sets organizations would be looking for in 2020, like in
Yeah,
future?
that's another good question. I was going to say it depends. My immediate response was going to be cloud native tech. Let's start with that actually, because that's probably what I'm seeing the most of. So organizations are shifting. I mentioned that organizations are on the whole moving workloads or refactoring workloads for cloud computing, and I think that has a profound impact on the security profession. So I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier that I'm obviously my background's MCSA, MCSE, Microsoft stuff on prem largely. Well, as organizations are shifting from n-tier architecture to containers managed through Kubernetes and function as a service Lambda in AWS, the requirements for ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability, you don't absolve yourself of responsibility or requirement in those areas, but how you apply that is fundamentally different in a lot of cases. So I think we need a generation of professionals who understand kind of this hybrid ecosystem in which we operate. Kind of in built within that, or intrinsic to that, I should say, is also some form of understanding of development and coding. I'm seeing that becoming more prevalent in cybersecurity. Now, that's either from, and I want to try and avoid too much talk about AI and ML today, but maybe that side of things from an automation perspective, but also orchestration as well. So how many people now physically build servers? A lot of what I'm working on at the moment is infrastructure as code. Like I said earlier, it's a lot of containerization.
Right.
So having an appreciation of that, I think, is vitally important. But then so is the regular. I mean, it's such a tough question because so is the regulatory landscape. No more so than we find ourselves today are the implications of data privacy and kind of global cybersecurity regulation more prevalent. So it's important that we design controls commensurate with those. So it's difficult. There is such a broad range of skills
Yeah.
necessary, certainly at a management level, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I got it. And what do you think about the certifications? Should they be included in the job descriptions? Like, I mean, a lot of HRs know they filter candidates by looking at the certifications, whatever certifications they have
Yeah.
gone through. Is it necessary to have a list a certification as a requirement?
It made me smile when I saw this question because I was looking at my business cards the other day and I thought, do I put my certifications on there? Are there too many of them, or is it not appropriate in 2020? I think certifications very much have their place. I think obviously technology is changing so quickly that very specific certifications to a particular flavor of a technology, potentially on a specific operating system, perhaps certs aren't the most valuable long term for very specific technology accreditations. But one thing I love about certifications is kind of the attitude of the candidate. So if I see
Right.
a candidate who's taken time, effort, and in a lot of cases money to go through the process of obtaining certs, I think that shows a lot about their passion and their desire for cybersecurity and improving themselves professionally. Something possibly slightly contrarian, and I'm going to try and avoid being too controversial today, but with so many people having their CVs or resumes, I'm not sure where this is going out, let's say CVs because I'm English, um, professionally written. I mean, I see that. I mean, it's much harder today for me to differentiate really robustly strong candidates from possibly weaker candidates because everyone's CV looks great today, you know. So having
Right.
certs and having people who have attended training courses and can evidence, you know, a proactive attitude to cyber, I mean, I think that that speaks for itself. So certificates and certifications, I should say, in isolation aren't really much use. You know, you have to have people who have practically done the job and have, you know, got the war wounds almost from doing so. But I think certification has, you know, has a real place in our industry, so long as it's done properly and they're the right certs for the right roles. Yeah.
Right. That's a good point, actually. Like people who have done certifications, they show their intent
Yeah,
that,
completely.
yeah, as a lot of professionals keep jumping over places as soon as they get a better offer, how do you think we can retain good talent? It is a tough job for the HRs to retain good talent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It,
how do,
yeah, it is. Yeah, I do agree. I do agree with you. I mean, I think what was it that people say? People say that, you know, the average lifetime of a CISO potentially is 18 months to 2 years. And we hear a lot of points in the industry around, you know, tenure of security execs. But in my personal experience, if we're recruiting people for careers rather than point roles, then I think retention is much higher. If we can evidence to employees when they come on board that there is room to grow within an organization, that there are opportunities to try your hand at different disciplines of information and cybersecurity, then I find that retention of talent is solid. You know, I think something we do in our industry, which I'm dead against, is we obsess on specialization so early. And I wrote this in the book actually, that, you know, we're almost, it's almost like it's the opposite of the medical profession, where you go out and you try various different areas as a practitioner. You know, you're a GP, you then maybe specialize in cardiology, you'd look at different areas and then you decide what you want to do. In
right,
cybersecurity, we seem obsessed with making somebody a cryptographer or an app developer or a infrastructure security architect very early on in someone's career. And I think we lose people not only from organizations, but from our industry more broadly. So I'm a big fan of letting people, where it's obviously beneficial to the company as well, try their hand at
right,
various different aspects of cybersecurity. I think you will get
yes,
people who are just predisposed to changing jobs a lot. I think you can, you know, try and mitigate the risks of that by spending more time during the hiring process. And I think the
right,
other point, and this is probably as important as anything else I've said, pay people the correct money. I mean, I speak with so many people in my industry who say they were underpaid, they found another job, they then went back to their current employer, the current employer then matched the other employer, you know, and you get to that situation where someone's heart and mind has already left the organization. So I think as an industry, we need to stop nickel and diming people. But, you know, if we get the right people in the right roles and allow those people the opportunity to grow their careers within a company, then I think we can sort of mitigate the risks of people jumping about all over the place.
right. Pay people the right money is the right point you raised, actually.
Yeah, I don't
I
want to be
think,
massively
yeah,
unpopular with people, but, you know, I think at the end of the day, people have families and people need to, you know, feed
yeah,
them, and paying people what, and also there's an angle there around sort of perceptions as well. If people feel that they're underpaid compared to the industry, then that's a very visceral kind of emotive feeling, isn't it? And then people don't necessarily have the right attitude in their role. They're not going to go the extra mile for the company. So, you know, if you look after your employees, generally speaking, they will
yes,
put your company first, I hope.
yes, absolutely. And how easy or tough do you find to convince the board level executives when you need a new hiring as a CISO?
With great difficulty. um, it is. It's a challenge, right? Security, cybersecurity specifically, has exploded, hasn't it, over the last maybe 5 years? The requirements for cyber have exponentially grown as organizations are embracing new technologies, right? The world is digital. People have information absolutely everywhere. And then, of course, we require more people, better processes, and new technology to be able to mitigate the new risks, right? Or remove them, ideally, but that rarely Rarely happens. So there's a challenge with appearing to be the person who cried wolf. You know, if you're constantly going to your board and saying you need more people for a new point solution that you're bringing into your environment, and it needs, you know, 7 people to water feed and manage it, that's not going to go down particularly well. I think we as
Right.
security leaders, as strategists, architects, and CISOs have to be doing more with less. In all seriousness, I think platform architecture and the requirements for you know, technology fabrics in organizations, they're not only required to have higher efficacy technical solutions, but if you're buying into platform architecture, you know, you have that cohesion between your tooling, you can then start to leverage automation, orchestration solutions, which ideally will reduce the requirement for people for every tool. It's a very dangerous position to be in, and it's one I see a lot in our industry. Is new threat comes out, latest vulnerability, we buy a new tool, and you end up in your data centers with, you know, what I've called before this pizza box architecture. So you have, you know, new threat, new tool, new threat, new tool. That's bad enough from a capex perspective, but then you need people to run each of these individual point solutions, which becomes an incredibly costly exercise. So it's difficult if you're going to go in with that attitude. If you're aligning your people to your tools that you require to mitigate specific risks which have been identified with your board execs, then I think evidencing the requirement for people is a much easier proposition. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I
Got
think
it.
if you buy, it's a difficult balance, because, you know, tools without the right people and process are ineffective. But then, of course, you need people. You do need a good mix of robust people with good skills. Of course,
Right.
requirements for people grow as your threat landscape evolves. But yeah, do more with less. Reuse what you've got. Reduce complexity. I know they all sound like truisms, but it's, you know, I think that's a good approach.
Right. And how should a HR approach a cybersecurity candidate? Like, I feel the approach itself is problematic.
Yeah. In what, I mean, I have my views on this. In what way do you think it's problematic?
Hmm.
And
Hello?
hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Great. I
Go
mean,
on.
yeah, spend time with HR early and regularly. It's almost like the approach to DevOps, right? We're told that we're supposed to work cross-functionally with our, you know, development and engineering teams to ensure security requirements are tabled early on, iteratively, and for us to be flexible. Well, why aren't we doing that with our HR and personnel teams? So, you know, shout out to my guys and girls at Tanium. I think they're awesome. I spend a lot of time on every role sitting down and running through kind of scenario and situational planning, giving some good examples of what I'm looking for. Start to
Right.
categorize your requirements as well into primary and secondary. Try and avoid
Yes.
that, you know, shopping list job spec that goes onto LinkedIn, which is aspirational at best and quite frankly demotivates candidates. So the approach I take with HR is quite hands-on. And a lot of leaders think, oh no, you know, I've got all these interviews to have and I've got other things that I need to do. But that's quite you know, it's almost a myopic view, isn't it? If you don't spend the time early on with HR to make sure you're getting the right candidates, how can you expect those candidates, once they're with your company, not to be, to your earlier question, jumping all over the place and moving on for a better offer? I think if we, you know, if we work closely with HR, we understand why we need the people we need, what they're going to be doing. I just think it's much better on. It's better for the candidates as well. We get the right people for the right roles, and
True.
HR are more effective as well.
Yeah, yeah, true. As a CISO, what would be your advice to organizations in recruiting cybersecurity professionals? Like, I think you have almost,
Hello, Bashir, still there? You've
uh,
gone very quiet.
yeah, I think you have almost, yeah, given the answer to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, my advice would be realistic in the first instance. You know,
Right,
if you have an understanding of, you know, the gap in capability that you have in your organization, then, you know, like I said, be pragmatic. You know, don't put out these enormous job specs with a wish list of responsibilities that quite frankly can't be fulfilled. I would also say consider the people you have in your company already. I would say
right,
attitude is probably the most important, don't quote me on that, the most important point, but it's critically important. Having people who care about your company and will do the right thing and will go the extra mile. Look at those people. They might not be in cybersecurity today. Perhaps they're working as developers, perhaps they're working in
Right.
DevOps, or perhaps they're engineers, but they have the right kind of analytical thinking. They have the right predisposition to be good at cybersecurity. And passion and enthusiasm in our industry, you can't learn that in a certification. That has to be something that you care about. So understand the role, understand what that person or people are going to bring to the organization. How is it going to improve efficiencies? How is it going to reduce risk? Because they're the points that your board are going to care about, aren't they? And pay the right amount of money for the right people to do the job that you want them to
Yeah.
do. Does that answer the question? That's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but that's what I feel, really. Be realistic, and I think you'll get the right people if you do so.
Yeah, you are right. And let us come to your book finally. You have written a very good book, like cyber risk management, prioritize threat, identify vulnerabilities, and apply controls. And it happens that it reached number one bestseller also on Amazon UK. Does it provide some kind of a training for new hirings? Does it have something for the uh, new
Yeah.
hirings?
Yes and no. I'm going to say yes so everyone buys it. But what I wanted to do for each chapter, the way I approach the book, in fact, I'll rewind a little. My motivations were that I'd go into organizations and I'd have a conversation with a CIO or a CISO or CEO in some cases around
Yeah,
kind of the application of controls in their
right,
environment. And by controls, I do mean people, process, and technology. But we'd inevitably get into a conversation around a risk equation. And a lot of organizations, unfortunately, and maybe I see less of this now, maybe I don't, who get very kind of focused on either threats or vulnerabilities. So if you take a very threat focus to risk, you run the risk of having, every single possible permutation and threat scenario being considered at an executive level, and that doesn't always help a company with their priorities. Or you have the other organization who's very vulnerability focused and is just looking at every single possible thing that's come back from a scanning tool in their environment without a lot of context of the assets that are important or potentially the actors who are looking to exploit vulnerabilities. So I put this book together that takes kind of the constituent components of the risk equation. So actors initiate events, events exploit vulnerabilities, vulnerabilities cause business impact. I've kind of saved you reading 400 pages there. But by taking that holistic approach to risk, I think you can
right,
start to qualify the things that are important to your company. And in doing
right.
so, I put together a checklist at the end of each chapter, which is just the things to consider. So a lot of that was aimed at the new CISO or the new hiring manager in cybersecurity. So yes, there's a lot of what I hope is sage advice in that book. And yeah, I touch on, I go into more detail, I should say, on a number of the points that I've covered today around specialization, certifications, the importance of hiring the right people for the right roles, and yeah, a number of kind of quick start guides for strategy, architecture, and the like. So yeah, if you haven't read it, yeah, get out there. If you have read it, thank you very much. And yeah, it's been
Yeah,
an
I think
enjoyable
I have to buy
experience.
it now. Yeah. Chris, unfortunately we are running out of time. I wish we had more time for this awesome podcast to continue for some more time.
Hmm.
Anyways, thank you for taking time and sharing your valuable insights.
Bashir, absolute
We
pleasure.
would surely love, yeah, we would surely love to have you as a guest many more times.
I'd like that. Great stuff. Thanks, Bashir.
Yeah,
Thanks to Peerless for having me.
yeah. Well, yeah, thank you, Chris. Well, that's our guest, Christopher J. Hodson, for you. Well, peer listeners, if you have any comments, please comment below in the PR Talk section. Goodbye, all, till the next podcast. PR Talk hiring an Infosec professional in 2020. Goodbye.